Day 24. So today I was at the Jardin d'Acclimatation, the Garden of Acclimatization, or um, perhaps even just the Garden of Temperature Regulation. I'll have to look that one up. It's a large park, and what I didn't actually realize is it's an amusement park, and so lots of kids there, lots of kids going on rides, some lovely park space, lots of just little moments there, but I really enjoyed. And in particular, I was there to go see the Fondation Louis Vuitton building, which is an art gallery sponsored by, of course, the foundation owned by Louis Vuitton. And I was excited to go because it's a Frank Gehry building, and I am a big fan of Frank Gehry as an architect. I've seen some of his other works, Dusseldorf, New York, Toronto. Um, I just like his style. His style is very unusual, and it was really a great chance to enjoy the building, to enjoy the architecture both outside and inside. Um, I will admit the art inside was perhaps a little bit too modern for me, or just um, wasn't exactly what I was looking for, perhaps. Busy crowd, perhaps my one criticism of the architecture is it didn't necessarily feel like people could flow easily through it, but um, really, really enjoy the architecture, and then learning about the architecture, doing a bit of research. And really it's sort of two elements, I suppose. One is a box and one is kind of a glass box. And then if you read about Gehry's process, it's almost a sense of exploding them both, or just dismantling them both into this very perhaps whimsical looking structure, very unusual and striking looking structure. Gehry doesn't do plain buildings by any sense. And I've read a lot about his work and his process, and apparently before every project he is anxious, even this far into his career, where he probably has more commissions than he ever says yes to, and he is very much a worldwide, well-known architect who will go and be studied in history books and architectural history books, I'm sure, for many years to come. And he starts with these very loose, broad sketches. He starts with bits of crumpled paper, and he really likes that organic look to things. And so, again, what does that mean for me, and what is reflected within that architecture for me? And I do have a love of architecture, and I think modern buildings are a great chance to really understand what we see in them, what we see ourselves in them. And though that may not have been the intention of the architect, I think there's always a great opportunity within that. I think the first is that deconstructed style, and I think is just so interesting, and it certainly requires a certain amount of bravery. It just requires a certain amount of courage to be the architect that creates something that out there. You have to be really willing to step into a space where there will be critics. There will be those who don't agree with your architectural choices, with your artistic choices. I'm sure there are those that found the building ugly. I am not one of them. I quite enjoyed it. And where are we deconstructing our lives? Where are we taking what is comfortable, what is expected of us, and where are we starting to rearrange that a little bit? Where are we starting to find some edges, find some choices, find some places where we're doing things that may be a bit more controversial, that everybody doesn't agree with? And these don't have to be giant artistic works. Sometimes, as we've talked about, where you work, who you're with, how you spend your time, you may have critics even on those sorts of decisions. And so what is required to be able to enter into that artistic space or that life choice space? And I think, really, as we hit a stride of midlife, I hope that it is that we can find that energy and that direction inwards and not be seeking it outwards. I think Gehry became a successful architect because he did the architecture that felt true to him. I don't know that he was out to win any architectural awards. I think so much of that comes later as people learn to appreciate your work. And again, even the artist today that was on display, while I may not have agreed with all of his work, and as they say, found some of it too modern, what I did appreciate in the exhibition was this was a large body of work over 50 or 60 years for this particular artist. And I did appreciate watching the evolution of what started with blurry photographs, what had some paintings, what had some newer materials in terms of glass or perspex or plastic or mirror work and a few of those sorts of things. And so I did appreciate the evolution that happened. And again, this is another person who was doing art that felt true to that individual as an artist rather than seeking wide acclaim. The acclaim often comes in the rearview mirror, I feel like. The other interesting piece about the building and the architecture is Gehry also said it was made to keep evolving, to keep changing, and to never almost be that same building twice. And I would say I do appreciate that. And that was the case for me even today. It was a day where it was largely sunny, but there were clouds coming through. And as we kind of went from morning to midday into the afternoon, the light on the sails continued to change. The reflections that they had continued to change. I don't doubt that the seasons have an effect on that as well. There are lots of beautiful, bright yellow and a few red trees around and having their influence on the building as well. And so again, our evolution, our ongoing metamorphosis, and are we the same person twice? And do we want to be the same person twice? Can we allow that we will always be changing and always be growing, and that is a path that will have quote unquote mistakes and failures in it. And it does still become part of that metamorphosis. It does still become part of that evolution. And we learn from it and we grow from it. And can we welcome that as part of the process, as part of the cost of admission in being able to keep going through that metamorphosis, going through whatever it is that we're going through at this stage in our lives and figuring out how things are changing, what we want, what we don't want, and just trying to find ourselves in all of that. I think that is the challenge in all of that. And perhaps there was an interesting love of Gehry because all the pieces don't fit together perfectly. It is not a building you can look at and instantly kind of understand it compared to, just across the river in the background, you can also see La Défense. And if I look at a 30-story skyscraper that is square, that is steel and glass, it makes instant sense. I know what it is in an instant. This is a building that takes a bit of time. You have to walk around it. You have to look at both the outside and then see under those sails, see the building that sits under those sails, and where are the pieces of our exterior, what sits underneath the sails that we have that are maybe reflecting light, and where's the building underneath? What is that building for us? What is true for us? What is the core solid part of it? While the sails kind of are the pieces on the outside that change and metamorphosize and have a certain organized chaos to them, I suppose. They almost in some ways look too big and heavy to be floating, and yet at the same time they do look like they're floating. And then as you get inside, you can start to see the structures that support them and why they look like they're floating, because it is largely glass that we see, but underpinned with a more hidden wooden and steel frame sitting underneath it. And how many people in our lives are sort of a glass facade, and how much do we have that necessary framework and scaffolding that sits underneath of us? That is what keeps us whole. That is what keeps us grounded when everything else is shifting. And that to me is that core self part of us. What is the part of us that is unchanging? What is the part of us that is true to ourselves? What is the part that is going to support us when everything around us is changing? When those glass sails are reflecting sunlight and clouds and our different moods and our different likes and dislikes, and what stays true underneath all of that. What gives us life again? What inspires us? What is it that will help make it be a life worth living? What is it that has us excited to get up in the morning? And I have a funny feeling Frank Gehry is pretty excited to get up in the morning to work on new projects. And even though he has a certain anxiety with every project, there is a certain pathway that they seem to go, from what I've read, that he is discovering them more than he has a particular vision in his mind that he is imposing on them. He will be doing small experiments. They will be making scale models. They'll keep figuring it out. They'll keep looking at different aspects of it. And it's hard to believe that this giant complex building was ever kind of a vision in somebody's head. But when you start to understand his process, when you start to understand he's not necessarily working with really linear geometric kind of spatial thinking, but really around space, volume, lines, shape, fullness, and that ability to just be a bit more playful in it, that ability to let go and very much let go. And I think this is where the controversy probably comes in for his architecture. There are those that just don't get it. There are those who really want something square because that is the vision that they have for any architecture, and it disturbs them that it is so organic. Perhaps it may feel like it's breaking the rules, and they can't get past that. Sometimes different pieces of work, different pieces of architecture, different pieces of art break the rules, and we as a society, or a subset of society, or viewers or patrons, are the ones that sort of decide if it breaks the mold in the right way. And for Gehry, I really think that it does. I think he's landed on something really, really important in being able to just tap into something bigger. I don't think it's a logical process that he fully uses. I would be surprised if it was a fully logical process. It really sounds like a process of trusting what is going to come forward and giving himself space to be pleasantly surprised. And not his words, but I have a funny feeling he's sort of listening or looking at the architecture to reveal itself. And I absolutely do see the parallels in that space around there is a portion of ourselves that is coming forward that we can't shape, that we can't simply arrive at with some CAD drawings. We can maybe make ourselves look like everybody else, but is that what we want? Perhaps at certain times we would rather blend in, we would rather not stand out, and yet where are those opportunities for ourselves to be more organic, to be ourselves, to break the rules, and to let ourselves be revealed, to create the space for ourselves to come through, to create the vehicles for ourselves to come through, and without a whole lot of expectations, without a whole lot of constraints that they need to live with, and what emerges from there. And just because it's a little bit different, just because it's a little bit more unknown, just because it may look a little different than some people's expectations, doesn't mean that it shouldn't be there, doesn't mean that it shouldn't have a voice, doesn't mean that it shouldn't get expression. This is the time to choose to step into that space, to be willing to go against the grain, to be a little bit more deconstructed, to have maybe a few more raw edges at times, or even at different times to not look like you have it all together, to not look like all of the edges and lines are straight and perfect and neat. It is a chance to simply allow yourself, the self that is emerging, the self that wasn't there 5 years ago or 10 years ago, to be present, to gain expression, to align different aspects of your life with that self, the self that knows what fills it up and recharges it, what relationships are valuable and worthy and nurturing, what careers or money making activities are enjoyable enough that they don't feel like a chore, that they don't feel mundane. And how are you spending your time? Are you numbing out in front of the TV or video games or anything else? Are you distracting yourself? Or can you really be with yourself and really appreciate organic forms, really appreciate natural forms, and just be in that present moment? It is something I come back to again and again in my time here. How much I'm able to sit and just look at a great piece of architecture from several angles over many minutes and just take it all in. Take it all in without trying to analyze it. Take it all in without trying to worry about whether it's trendy or not trendy or cool or not cool. Sure, part of me chose it because this is an architect whose other work I've seen, but it wasn't guaranteed that I would have a positive relationship with the building. And it did take a little bit of time. It took a couple minutes of really walking around, starting to get an understanding of the building, starting to get what it was all about. And the more time I could spend with those layers, the better it got. And then being inside and getting to go through some of the terraces and see some of the internal architecture and sculptures and skeletons of the building contributed as well. And so know that all of our layers count, and we should be only heeding those who want to see all of our layers, who want to know our whole selves before they judge us, who aren't strictly about appearances, strictly about trying to keep up with whoever, but trying to really understand the substance and understand that it may look a little different, but that doesn't mean that it isn't valuable. It isn't a chance to expand our thinking. It isn't a chance to gain new perspective or just be delighted by somebody's extreme talent and willingness to be in a different place. So with that, I'm off to enjoy my evening, and I will say thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.